Elizabeth Weil-Greenberg, staff reporter at The Appeal. There are 3 candidates running for Pima County Attorney. All were invited, but only 2 were able to join us today. Laura Conover is a criminal defense attorney and former public defender. She founded Conover Law in 2016. Laura has also worked with employers to hire formerly incarcerated individuals following their release from prison. Jonathan Mosier is the Chief Criminal Deputy of the Pima County Attorney's Office. He has worked as a prosecutor for 15 years. Jonathan is a member of the Board of Directors of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Tucson and the Humane Society of Southern Arizona. Also invited, but not participating, is Mark Diebolt. Mr. Diebolt has worked as a deputy county attorney for the last 23 years. Thank you so much for joining us today. Several crises in America are colliding right now. The killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, among tragically many others. The violent police responses to peaceful protests, and the grave threat posed by COVID-19, particularly to vulnerable communities and people of color. These intertwined crises are exposing profound inadequacies of the legal system. Pima County is Arizona's 2nd most populous county. The Pima County Attorney makes decisions that impact the lives of its county residents and has the power to shape and change criminal legal system policy. Thank you so much for joining this forum, Laura and Jonathan. Before we proceed with our conversation, there are a few ground rules for the forum. We'll begin with an opening statement from each candidate, then we'll move to the question and answer portion of the forum, and then end with a closing statement from each candidate. We've picked randomly to determine the order in which the candidates will deliver their opening statements and answer the initial question. After the initial question, we'll alternate who answers the question first. Laura, you will have 2 minutes for your opening statement. Then Jonathan will have 2 minutes for your opening statement. I'll then ask questions, and you'll each have 1.5 minutes to respond. There will only be follow-up if I, as the moderator, elect to ask a follow-up question. And then finally, you'll have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Laura, you may now offer your opening statement.
I want to thank you all for hosting this forum. This is a true pleasure for me. I have been studying criminal justice reform my entire life, and so it's an honor to be here in particular with this group and this audience. I am a student of your work for a long time and very much currently, because we are at a very critical place in history right now. And that was a very somber introduction because this is a very serious time. I regret to share with you that here in Tucson, in Arizona, we are at that critical juncture ourselves right now. We have an incredible spike in COVID happening right now here, especially in our detention facilities. And I am incredibly immersed in that urgency right now and have been since March. And then additionally, we learned just last week that in April, we had lost a young man named Carlos Adrian in our community during a call for help and a mental health and addiction crisis. And he lost his life while he was in custody, in police custody. So my community, our community is facing these 2 crises head on right now. I am looking to step into the county attorney's office after a 44-year partnership of 2 county attorneys is coming to a close with a retirement. And so we have a chance for the first time in 40 years here in Tucson to bring a reformer in from outside the agency to bring in true criminal justice reform. I am that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Jonathan, you can now offer your opening statement.
Thank you. I think everyone on this forum will be relieved to hear that this race is not about whether there will be massive change in Pima County, because there will be, no matter who wins. There will be significant reforms. My name is Jonathan Mosier. I'm a committed reformer. I'm also a tested prosecutor. I really want to thank all of you for putting this on, and I look forward to the discussion today. I want to tell you one story that introduces what I mean when I say I'm committed to reform. 10 months ago, as chief criminal deputy, I was sitting in a meeting in our office facing a deluge of cases involving low levels of narcotic or dangerous drugs. And as we all know, and I personally believe, it's been a horrific tragedy, an inhumanity perpetrated upon addicts, that people possessing low-level amounts of drugs have been sentenced to prison. We would never treat an alcoholic that way, and that humanity must end. At that meeting 10 months ago, I argued to my boss that we had to have a different approach to charging these cases. I forcefully made the argument. It was rejected. I do not currently set the policy at the Pima County Attorney's Office, and if I'm elected, I will change the policy significantly. I'm 19 years in recovery. I suffered from alcoholism and addiction. I know what it is like to not be able to stop using even when you want to. We will not continue to treat alcoholism and addiction in the disparate ways that we have. That include, and this has had a disparate effect on minorities as well as impoverished communities. So look, I'm going to change things. I also am a tested prosecutor, and that means that I've been managing and leading other prosecutors for years. I know how to get this work done. Here's the exciting part, is that at that meeting where my reform suggestion was rejected, the other bureau chiefs and supervisors who were present, they all watched me advocate really on their behalf. And most all of them have endorsed my candidacy because they want the vision for change that I will bring. I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Let's get started now with the discussion. The protests we're seeing across the country are coming at a unique moment, as cities and states are slashing budgets for services across the board: waste collection, housing, education, even healthcare services, during the middle of a historically devastating pandemic. Yet many police budgets remain essentially untouched, or in some cities are actually growing. As this conversation about defunding the police takes place in different cities across the country, what is your position on realigning public safety budgets by shifting resources away from traditional law enforcement and investing in alternative public safety programs? Let's start with Jonathan.
I'm really excited about changing and reimagining the way we use police and police practices. So let's start with a program here in Tucson that I hope is spreading nationally. It's called Deflection. The Tucson Police Department uses it. And what it means is that officers who encounter somebody in a mental health crisis or with substance use disorder can be deflected. In other words, not taken to jail, but taken to treatment. This is an incredibly exciting program, but what's the problem? We don't have it countywide. As Pima County Attorney, I will advocate in every way possible for deflection to be adopted by all law enforcement agencies in Pima County. And here's what you should know about making reforms. It requires the ability to work collaboratively, to build bridges, not deepen divides. And I am able to work, I have been working with law enforcement from all different agencies, police chiefs from around our community. And I believe that this is a good time to make changes like what we're talking about in terms of implementing deflection. Now, when it comes to defunding, I am concerned, and here's why. One of the top menu items that we've got to get implemented nationally and certainly countywide in Pima County, I think we can all agree, officers must have de-escalation training. When we say de-escalation training, I've attended a full day of de-escalation training. Ever since I saw it, I've advocated for it. I believe it is the way of the future. Frankly, I believe It may have saved Richard Brooks. It may have saved Carlos Ingram Lopez. Deflection is important. But you see, this training does not come for free. It should not be a PowerPoint for half a day. It needs to be ongoing training, including scenarios. And so that's just one of the 8 can't wait items. Some of the others also impact training, like use of force continuums, duty to intervene. And so when we talk about these things that we need to get done with training, we've got to be able to pay for them. I'm sorry, I've probably gone on too far over time. Forgive me. Thank you.
Sorry, I think I was on mute. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Laura?
Elizabeth, is this a 1 minute or 2 minute?
It is 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Okay, I can do. We are in a unique situation in Tucson. The Tucson Police Department actually implemented 8 can't wait some time ago. And what's so pressing about that is how far yet we must go. We've both mentioned now the loss of Carlos Adrian, and it was a desperation call by his grandmother, his nana, and it was a clear welfare check type of call that he's out of control and I need help was the call for help. We have one of the nation's first mental health units here in Tucson. It's extraordinary. It was cutting edge many, many years ago. I'm biased because my brother founded it. It's a large, non-uniformed, highly technical mental health unit that's both law enforcement and it's medical professionals. So it has that collaboration that is exactly what defund calls for, where we have medical professionals responding to medical crises. That's what all of our communities so desperately need. The tragedy for Carlos Adrian and his family is that the mental health unit's not big enough and couldn't respond that night. It is heartbreaking because I'm confident that if they had, we would have had an entirely different result. So we need to concentrate on the highlights of defunding and increase what we have for both the Tucson Police Department and the sheriffs who don't even have it yet. We're getting there.
Thank you so much, Laura. Police unions frequently prevent officer accountability and foster secrecy around policing. The common understanding seems to be that it's the prosecutorial reliance upon police officers as well as police unions that deter county attorneys from challenging the culture of these departments. There have been calls across the country to disentangle this close relationship, as well as calls for elected prosecutors to reject financial contributions from police unions. Starting with Laura, what's your position on police union campaign contributions, and will you donate any existing contributions to community-based nonprofits? And you have 3 minutes for this answer.
Oh, 3 minutes. Okay, thank you. I am a lifetime criminal justice reformer, and I so benefit from all of you who started this in 2014, 15, 16, reformers who ran for DA offices nationwide. And I now have the benefit of all of your work and study so that I'm not reinventing the wheel. So I chose 9 months ago, as soon as I filed, to try to build a trust relationship with law enforcement, because I don't want to just dream or study about reform anymore. I want to immediately start implementing it. And I need law enforcement locally to work with me and not against me to implement criminal justice reform. I fought really hard to create that trusting relationship with the largest sheriff's deputies union. And what I think was a first in nation moment, they endorsed me, but not only me, they endorsed the reform platform, which I'm not sure has happened from a law enforcement agency. And I will post that on Twitter and Facebook their letter so you can see it later. Because I've been studying this for so long, I'm aware of inherent conflict. And so I said at that time, months ago, I won't be taking any money. I don't want your money. I want your support. Because I want you to work on reform with me. So I don't have any money that I need to return. More importantly, I have to go after the inherent conflict. So we're not going to have a statewide neutral prosecutorial agency here, the way the Georgia Bureau of Investigation works, et cetera. I can't wait for Phoenix. And if you know anything about Arizona politics, I can't wait for Phoenix to do something for Tucson. Years ago, I would have called for the appointment of a special prosecutor to go after allegations of law enforcement abuse and excessive force. We need a neutral expert prosecutor to investigate those cases, who is not appointed by me and will not report to me. And I've offered that right now to the office as a suggestion as we go through our current loss of life that we're in the middle of right now. That's the kind of independence and neutrality we need. So that is the way I have compartmentalized the need for reform on the one hand, and my need for local law enforcement to be working on reform for me, and the benefit of a neutral independent prosecutor to restore trust in the community.
Thank you so much, Laura. Jonathan, and you also have 3 minutes. Oh, Jonathan, I'm sorry. I think you might still be on mute. We will.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I'm having a hard time looking at my watch and trying to do the answers, and I didn't get the time warning last time. So the furthest thing I want to do is run over. If you can somehow shut me up, if you can jump on the screen or whatever you need to do, I forgive me, please. I feel like a one-man band here trying to watch that clock. So look, I do need to correct facts when they are misstated, and forgive me because I'm running a campaign based on positivity and my view for the future. But I am going to correct a factual misstatement. So Ms. Conover referenced being endorsed by the largest sheriff's deputies union. That's actually not the case. The sheriff's deputies union has, I believe, over 1,000 members. There is a smaller splinter association that is not in fact a union. It has endorsed her. What I'm asking this group to please look into is the situation in Tucson that received national and international attention involving an incident with a limbless African-American male who was treated in really almost unbelievable fashion by a sheriff's deputy. It's the association that has endorsed Ms. Conover that defended that conduct. That is the association we're talking about. And I think it's important to just state that fact. It's a small splinter from the main sheriff's department union, the Fraternal Order of Police union there. But the more important part is it defended those actions on that video. And I have not heard Ms. Conover reject that association's endorsement because of that defense work that they've done. I am endorsed by the Tucson Police Officers Association. Interestingly, Ms. Conover was referencing her brother's work in the mental health support team. This union is her brother's union. He's in the leadership of the union. That union, I'm proud to say, endorsed me, I believe, unanimously. Here's what I think about unions and independence of prosecutors. I'm not going to wait for Phoenix either. We do need an independent investigation and prosecution agency for officer-involved use of force incidents. We are not going to have public confidence and trust in that decision-making until it is taken out of the hands of local elected officials, and it's taken out of the hands of local police chiefs and put in a proper statewide task force. And I don't want that to be housed at the Attorney General in Arizona. That is not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting creating a commission to implement this new investigative agency. I do, however, agree that that is a legislative solution that may be a long time coming. And that is why, as county attorney, I will specially deputize somebody and have them reside outside of my office handling these issues. I'd like to, if possible, have it be a group of people, so it's no one person's decision, but have them not be answerable to me, right? Because you don't want the elected official making a decision to charge or not to charge a case where either way you might perceive it to be based on politics. Look, how am I doing on time? Sorry. I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You have 30 seconds. I'm sorry. That was my fault.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just want to use that to point out one thing, which is that these reforms, I've been working on reforms, not just talking about them, not just studying them from within the prosecution office. I created a protocol, a written protocol that you all can look at and help us improve because it's a living document relating to the disclosure of police officer misconduct. I want more transparency, more written protocol, and more community participation to arrive at protocol, for example, involving officer-involved shootings. Thank you.
Elizabeth, would it be possible to have a 1-minute rebuttal to this question?
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. I'll set my clock right now. So the Sheriff's Deputies Union is the union that the county negotiates with. It's the recognized union. So I don't know how that would be called a splinter union, but a union in its fundamental form, I think we all know, is there for due process. So if a deputy is alleged in misconduct, they are there to ensure due process for that deputy. I'm very surprised that Mr. Mosher would reference a traumatic case from a year ago where a child was tackled by a deputy on video. He was the criminal chief, and he had that video for 2 months and did not issue any charges. So during a full 2-month period of review, when he's talked a lot about how he viewed that video over and over and over again. So I think it's very important that we remember the importance of due process and the union's function, the union's important function to make sure that their deputies have due process. We never want to lose sight of that when there's an allegation. And that's why an independent prosecutor really helps establish that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Oh, I'm sorry, Jonathan, you're on mute. Oh, Jonathan. Oh, Jonathan, you're on mute.
Sorry, I just need a minute of rebuttal myself now. That's a different issue.
Okay, you can have 1 minute for rebuttal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I was made aware of the video of the boy, Emmanuel, being wrestled to the ground in a fashion we all know to have been disturbing, and immediately took action to dismiss charges which, unbeknownst to me, had been issued against the boy. That was the wrong that I immediately corrected. That was not a case where, based on the video evidence alone, we could immediately proceed to charge an officer with any misconduct. There needed to be an investigation. That investigation then proceeded, and the person who controls the length of the investigation is the sheriff, not me. So the investigation was brought to our office after I went on mandatory leave from the position of chief criminal deputy. So I wasn't even in the office when that review was conducted. So I just wanted to make that clear. I don't control the timing of those reviews. Now, I do think in the George Floyd situation, there needs to be an escape clause from any written protocol so that if facts emerge that are so egregious, horrifying, a threat to community safety, we can then not take time to wait for an investigation, but take action as we would against any other criminal. But that, I don't think, applies in a case where you need further investigation to get all the witness statements and have that investigation brought to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan and Laura. From just moving on to the next question, although definitely within the same theme. From 2011 to 2018, there were 600 police shooting cases reported in Arizona. Of the hundreds of cases reviewed, Only one officer was charged with murder in connection with an on-duty shooting. If elected, what will you do to ensure that police officers are held accountable for misconduct? Let's start with Jonathan, and you have 3 minutes.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I unmute myself. One thing we must ensure is that any person charged with a crime receives due process. So no one should be charged with murder because we haven't charged someone with murder in a while. We need to charge murder whenever facts emerge that justify that charge. Now, I am more than willing to anytime, and in fact, this is something I've done in my career. So let me back up for one moment. I have repeatedly had murder cases brought to me by victim families, by police officers, by other prosecutors, and had people ask me, do you think there's a charge here that should have been issued? I have repeatedly, and I can give you 3 or 4 examples, put together and pursued cases at trial where others had not found it fit to issue charges. So I lean forward when I see evidence that I think is appropriate to proceed to trial. I have that experience. I know how to teach and lead other prosecutors in that work. That is the work that is required to hold police officers accountable. Good prosecution work. So I've been really clear on the George Floyd case that I think a horrible injustice is still being perpetrated on our country right now by prosecutors who aren't prosecuting that case effectively. For the healing of this nation, we need that case to be charged like any other strangulation homicide. Most frequently, we see these in the domestic violence setting. We would charge that case first-degree premeditated murder 10 times out of 10. And we would be successful in making the argument that reflection, premeditation, can be inferred from the circumstances of the length of time it took to strangle and suffocate the life out of George Floyd. So the fact is that I will be willing to look at any case, if anybody brings it to my attention, where we believe there's been a miscarriage of justice, either because there's a disproportionate sentence or because there should have been charges and there were not, whether or not it involves a police officer. And I believe that's one of the reasons why a robust conviction integrity unit working closely with a robust appeals unit is absolutely critical. We're open-minded to the fact that we may have got something wrong. We'll take another look at it whenever necessary. And there's not statute of limitations that prevent us from taking a look at homicide cases if one comes to light where charges should have been brought. I will not hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Laura, and you also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This question really gets at the heart of the lack of transparency, which causes such deep mistrust in a community. And that needs to be repaired here in Pima County, in Tucson as well. I don't know if our local county attorney's office tracks information, but it's not shared transparently. And we can and must do that. I intend to hire a criminologist immediately to track data and then be fully transparent about it with both the public and all of my agency partners to really address these kinds of issues. Last week at our emergency press conference that the mayor and the chief of police held, the chief of police explained here in Tucson that in the last 10 years, there have been 12 in custody deaths, including the current one that we're dealing with now. 7 were determined by the medical examiner to be suicides, while the remaining 4 were reviewed by the county attorney and none resulted in any criminal responsibility placed on the officers. Years ago, we needed an independent prosecutor reviewing these cases to take away the trust problem that will build up over the years if we continue on with a conflicted office reviewing and not charging and not charging and not charging. And what an independent prosecutor does is 2 things. is it ensures that if charges should be filed, they will be filed, and a case will be pursued against a police officer because they are not conflicted by being part of the county attorney's office, the DA's office. And also importantly, if the officer should be exonerated away from the allegation, then that too is an achievable outcome. But until we get away from the conflict, we won't see change. And we've known we have to make these reforms for years. And so it's frustrating for a lifelong Tucson, like my whole life has been here, and I'm a candidate in my 40s, and this is the end of a 40-year regime. So it's that feeling for so many of us that we've been talking about and waiting for reforms for years and years, and not getting any outcome-based results. And that's why having a criminologist is so important, because you can't run away from the data. And we won't anymore. We're going to tackle these things head on. There's incredible potential here once we start moving into transparent, good government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I just wanted to let you both know we're going to move to 90 seconds each for responses, just since we're at the halfway mark, and we want to make sure that we get to everything that we all want to discuss. In the middle of the night on March 13th, Louisville, Kentucky police executed a no-knock warrant and entered 26-year-old Breonna Taylor's apartment. They fired shots and hit Breonna at least 8 times, killing her. Police found nothing illegal in her home. In fact, the person they were searching for was already in custody. Police departments all over the country use the same tactics with disastrous results. Pima County experienced one of these tragedies in 2011 when 26-year-old former Marine and Iraq War veteran Jose Guerrera was shot and killed when Pima County SWAT team members executed a no-knock raid on his family's home. Murder charges were not filed against the officers. Starting with Laura, what's your position on creating a policy prohibiting prosecutors from supporting law enforcement requests for no-knock warrants and publicly supporting a ban on no-knock warrants? And again, your response should be within 90 seconds. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura, you're still on mute.
Sorry, no, I did it. I did it this time. I'm in favor of a no-knock ban, and I want to be honest that in some places things are easier done than in other places. And again, I am borrowing from the wisdom of everyone who works for the appeal and is associated with the appeal, so that I'm constantly informed about best practices and how we can implement them here. What I mean by that is that Breonna's case has affected us all tremendously. We need to stay focused on it. I have followed Professor Colin Miller's work on this as he tackled the Kentucky statutes that might apply against the officers, and importantly, the work on no-knock warrants. Then getting that kind of intel, I go here locally and it's all about the data. So I pull the data, I talk to my law enforcement contacts, and it's a measure only used by SWAT, and it's used extremely rarely here. So I have the benefit in Pima County of taking a firm stand, acknowledging that it's an extreme rare use here, and so it won't have a profound effect. But what will have a profound effect is when a county attorney or a DA stands up and says, we will not engage in these reckless policies. We will not endanger the community in this way. We will find better investigative measures to use, and then I become an ally in Phoenix. I become an ally to the Arizona State Legislature pushing for these reforms. I become a strong voice even in Arizona, which tends to lean to the right. I become a strong voice in the nation to move these kinds of reforms in. I constantly borrow that the legislatures of Texas and Oklahoma have embraced criminal justice reform legislation, recognizing the shocking taxpayer benefits, that it's so much more fiscally responsible in doing so. And I do that to encourage Arizona. We can too. And it works in the reverse way. You know, Arizona prosecutor calls for the end of no-knock warrants, surely can lend political alliance to prosecutors elsewhere who can point to that. We should be united on the best practices and constantly informing each other. So I thank you for your work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. Jonathan?
Yes, so first, great question. It did refer to a case that happened in Pima County in 2011. And so I do want to make clear to everybody that in 2011, I was working in Coconino County and I had no involvement with that case. So I just don't want to leave the misimpression that I was handling that case or had any participation in it. That being said, I am troubled by, and I think we all are, troubled by a one-size-fits-all approach that has led police departments down a path that is militarized, and it's the opposite of a de-escalation oriented approach. And this is not theoretical for me. I've been having these arguments with members of SWAT teams, patrol officers, sergeants, lieutenants, police chiefs around Pima County. And I'm pleased to report that I think the prevalent opinion is that change is needed. So specifically with respect to no-knock warrants, I would rather propose a more collaborative process. What I mean by that is I think we've got to have an open, transparent process with community members present who have concerns. Whether it's folks from entities like Justice Collaborative, criminal defense lawyers, we want community members, community leaders from the African-American community and other minority communities. But we also want at that same table those who would argue for no-knock warrants, why they need them, and in what limited circumstances. And let's figure out, do we need them at all? Or perhaps we only need them in certain extremely limited circumstances and they've been drastically overused. That's probably a lot like what has happened with the type of command presence training that really is the opposite of de-escalation training. You know, I've tried to point out that I believe Rashard Brooks would still be alive if an officer with de-escalation training had approached him at the moment when he decided he was going to take him into custody and said, look, it appears you've been drinking. I mean, he's got a car, it's at a drive-through, he's intoxicated apparently. And so the police officer believes he needs to make an arrest. The way in which that interaction was approached contributed most likely to the way that interaction ended up. And de-escalation training can really address that point. So I think
I'm so sorry, Jonathan. Unfortunately, we're at time. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No,
thank you.
Don't be. Thank you so much. And I'd like now to turn to the issue of what are known as Brady or no call lists, which is when prosecutors identify law enforcement officers who have credibility or misconduct issues. Advocates around the country have demanded that prosecutor offices implement do not call lists for officers who have committed perjury and other acts of grave misconduct. In Pima County, there has been something known as the Law Enforcement Activity Disclosure List. Yet advocates are seeking a stronger, more aggressive approach to dealing with the credibility of law enforcement officers as witnesses in cases. For example, it was discovered in 2019 that the county attorney's office had failed to place an officer's name on that list back in 2016. Following the disclosure, the Pima Public Defender's Office reviewed 116 cases in which the officer was involved, which called into question the credibility of those prosecutions. Starting with Jonathan, what's your position on this? If elected, would you implement a no-call policy? And again, 90 seconds for each. Thank you.
Oh boy, I wish we had 3 minutes on this one. It's so important. So this is a really dense issue. I might have to talk fast, forgive me. The problem with what you're suggesting, which is that we should have an absolute no call list and anybody placed on it will not be called, is that it actually works against what we're trying to achieve. We want complete transparency. Here's the world of the future that I think the Justice Collaborative, along with me and anybody who will join with us, should be fighting for. And that is that every police officer has a part of their file that includes their social security number, their health insurance, their private information. And that is private. And everything else in that officer's file is public, so that we can just have full transparency and stop this issue from occurring. You need to know what's going on with every single officer. Defense lawyers need to know what's going on with every single officer, good and bad. I mean, let's just let the light of truth come shining in. I am in favor of transparency whenever possible. Now, here's the problem with calling something a liar's list. I met with the public defender after the news story came out that you're talking about. And I said, the problem with that approach and the point of saying, oh, this is tainted justice in Pima County, is that we now have a chilling effect on officers fighting tooth and nail not to get put on the list. If we make the list a one size fits all, it's a career ender. Then for some of the minor stuff that defense lawyers need to know about, it's hard for us to get it out of police agencies. We want to encourage all the information to be given us. We turn it over, do with it what you will to the public and the defense lawyers.
Thank you, Jonathan. Laura?
Transparency is the key. And so long as we are satisfied that, again, due process is honored, so that the officer who has this allegation against them has due process in order to deal with the allegation. Once that finding is made, transparency is just the key. I'm not sure, I'm a little bit nervous about releasing personnel files in the manner suggested. Because I think those files are also filled with wonderful things and commendations and public service and therefore a lot of irrelevant stuff that shouldn't be coming into litigation that could tip the scales of justice in ways that would have real strange outcomes. So I'm not quite sure that's the perfect resolution there. I think we start with ensuring the process has a due process and that rights are respected, because everyone's entitled to that. And then once we have a result, transparency is the only way forward. And again, that's how we build trust with the community. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. On June 30th, the Tucson Sentinel published an op-ed from the ACLU of Arizona that highlighted alleged acts of prosecutorial misconduct by candidates Jonathan and Mr. Diebolt. In Jonathan's case, a court found that he made a false and misleading statement to jurors during a murder trial, which led the Arizona Court of Appeals to overturn a murder conviction and order a new trial. In Mr. Diebold's case, he was reprimanded by his employer, the Pima County Attorney's Office, for violating his ethical duties as a prosecutor. The officer said in a letter of reprimand, "Your lack of attention to detail and failure to exercise due diligence on this issue is inexcusable for a prosecutor with your years of experience. Prosecutorial misconduct is a denial of justice. As county attorney, what will you do to hold yourself and every other prosecuting attorney accountable and adhere to strict ethical guidelines? And how will you respond to instances of prosecutorial misconduct?" Again, 90 seconds for each of you. We can start with Laura and then Jonathan. Oh, Laura, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you so much. Let me reset myself here. Running for office is extremely hard. All three of us are first-time candidates. There's extraordinary courage involved. I am particularly concerned about the Court of Appeals decision unanimously overturning a first-degree murder conviction. That's incredibly rare. And the problem with it is that the court said there had already been admonishment of the prosecutor in question, my opponent, Mr. Mosher, in a previous first-degree murder case, and that the misleading of the jury happened again. It's the again part that is concerning, and Mr. Mosher has handled and will handle his personal ramifications for this. What I need to make sure for this office going forward is that we have training, we instill a new culture in that office that inspires young prosecutors not to toe the line, not to win at all costs, but to seek justice, and to take the hard road and to take the loss when the result is justice. You have to recruit the inherent part of that person that can stand up and do the right thing at all times. And then you have to train and instill it every day, mentor it and keep it there in attorneys every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, thanks for bringing this up. The Tucson Sentinel piece was factually incorrect in significant respects. So here's what happened in the Dansdale case. I made the argument in a felony murder case that felony murder was and that is a type of murder where you don't even need to intend to kill. You don't even need to be the one who killed. I made the argument that that's less serious than premeditated murder, period. That's what I did. And interestingly, Ms. Conover incorrectly says that I had been admonished. That is absolutely false. What happened in the Urbina case is that I had had an appeal pending that ultimately was found not to have been misconduct. So that court reached the opposite result. And then what happened in the Dansdale court is that they decided differently, that it was in fact an error in my language. And that is a point well taken. I have modified my behavior. I will not say felony murder is less serious than premeditated murder again. I will note that the defense lawyer, the criminal defense lawyer from the Dansdale trial, has endorsed my candidacy because he finds me to be a lawyer with integrity. We've talked about this. I teach ethics for prosecutors. I brought Michael Morton to our office to talk. He is a wrongfully convicted man from Texas. He talked to us because I believe there was nothing more important, nothing, than a prosecutor not convicting an innocent person. There is no claim of actual innocence in Dansville. We've talked now about the technical error. Incredibly, the Tucson Sentinel irresponsibly published a piece, a guest opinion, where it made the claim that my error was in not talking about punishment with the jury and that I should have talked about the death penalty and other possible sanctions, which I hope we all know would have been absolutely incorrect. In fact, what the court found was that by saying felony murder is less serious than premeditated murder, my technical error in language was that somehow impliedly talked about punishment to the jury, which you can't do. Now, I didn't actually talk about punishment to the jury, but it was found that I had implied that. Lesson learned. But I think it's really important to be honest about the facts of Dansdale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Across the country, COVID-19, has highlighted policy failings within local and federal approaches to criminal justice. Starting with Jonathan, what specific criminal justice policy failings has COVID-19 exposed in Pima County? And what will you do to change those policies and practices within the prosecutor's office?
I'm so excited for this question because this goes back to what I opened with, which was that meeting 10 months ago. You see, in Pima County, we've had an effort called the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, and we're trying to reduce our jail population below 1,500 people. And I've been part of that effort. And we really want to reach that 1,500 goal. We were stopped at about 1,900. And that's when last summer we had that meeting I described earlier, where I argued forcefully to my boss, the county attorney, that we needed to stop charging so many small personal possession of narcotic and dangerous drug cases. You know, if you find a person with heroin in the park, jail and prison is not the answer. And I made that case forcefully, and the current county attorney outright rejected my argument. Like I say, a lot of the bureau chiefs and supervisors who were in that room have endorsed me because they believe in my view for the future. Now, how does this relate to COVID? Because when the COVID pandemic hit, my boss changed her view. Because it was desperately important to minimize risk of infection at the jail, we did what I had suggested 10 months before, and guess what the result was? We achieved that MacArthur goal that had been eluding us for so long. The jail population went all the way down into the 1,300s, well below the 1,500 goal we had been trying to achieve. How will I continue to implement that and protect that? Through a pre-charge diversion program, which will provide treatment, not jail or prison, at half the cost of prison with twice the effectiveness. We'll expand that program to thousands of people. I've already been doing that work. I'm the only candidate that's been doing that type of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Laura?
And Elizabeth, how much time for this one?
90 seconds.
Okay. People work so hard on achieving grants like the MacArthur grant, and I applaud their efforts. At the same time, it's alarming to think about having a reduction goal in the population of the jail that targets a certain number. I think that might still be remnants of the war on drugs philosophy that assumes we have to have some number of people like 1,500 in the Pima County jail. And this is why we just have to reframe the entire discussion. And where we go with that is bail reform. We ask every single time on every single case, unless this person is an ongoing threat to the community and a danger to the community and must be separated in jail, or a true flight risk, which means they have the means to flee the country. Unless those two things, why is anyone held in the jail, especially on tiny cash bail amounts, $250, $500, as this current county attorney's office continues to insist on? We need to look at every single case and ask the question, why are we jailing this person? And we've all been talking about this for decades, and it has nothing to do with COVID. I'm thrilled people are now recognizing, due to COVID, that jail is unsafe and unhealthy and traumatic, and only for those who must be separated from society. I'll take that momentum with me. But it's time for change. Thanks so much.
Thank you both so much. Our last question is also related to the pandemic. Some of the most vulnerable people in this pandemic are the unhoused or those struggling with mental illness. Many within these populations tend to be overrepresented in the criminal justice system because counties lack the resources to appropriately address their needs. And the pandemic has only exacerbated these challenges. The county attorney's office plays a substantial role in determining to what degree, if at all, the Pima County unhoused population will continue to experience criminalization. Starting with Jonathan, what specific steps will you take to ensure that a person's lack of stable housing or their poverty does not affect their interaction with the criminal legal system?
Well, first of all, with the mention of poverty, I want to point out and address that I can't imagine how we still have money bond driving any decision to keep anybody in custody. We've got to get away from the decriminalization, from the criminalization of poverty. And, whether you're rich or not has nothing to do with whether you present a risk to the community. And nobody should be in jail, let alone prison, unless they present a risk to the community. So that is a change that is happening regardless of who is elected. It sounds like we agree on that point. But more interestingly because I just say more interestingly, because I think that's a dramatic change that can be done on day one by both of us, is get away from money bond, only seek to hold in jail somebody who's dangerous. Don't seek fit to hold 1,500 people. Let's see if we can reduce the jail population to 0, but we've got to keep people in jail who threaten community safety. That is my point. Now, with respect to homelessness and poverty, we have an exciting program in Pima County, and I'm not sure if you're all aware of this in the Justice Collaborative. It's called Consolidated Misdemeanor Problem Solving Court, short COMPAS. And COMPAS Court has started with misdemeanor efforts to take people who have multiple pending cases, because often they relate to mental illness, sometimes drug addiction, and homelessness. And we find stable housing, we find treatment and programming if necessary, not more than what is necessary. And it turns out we have success stories that are absolutely heartwarming. We have somebody who had a couple hundred arrests over an 18-month period and only 2 law enforcement contacts after participation in COMPAS Court. So look, I believe that these resources, I go out and talk to nonprofits and other treatment providers in Pima County, and I am not hearing that the reason we're not doing these things is because of a lack of resources. And that's the very good news. Access, actually, healthcare will pay for a lot of these treatments that we're currently saddling ourselves with this inhumane, unduly expensive approach that is over incarceration. So yes, we need to get away from that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jonathan. Laura?
We've had a huge collaboration here in Tucson, and our houseless population has been going down. We have a large veteran community out here. Very proud of that, retired veterans, and a lot of intent upon first trying to get every veteran off the street. And that was a real shocking, in the best of ways, decline in our houseless population. So all the motivation to make sure that not COVID, not criminalization, not any skewed intentions lets us trickle back up. We want to continue that incredible progress here in Southern Arizona. What I think that entails more than anything is having a leader in the county attorney's office who's constantly in tune to that. And what I mean by that is that we spend 60% of the general fund in Pima County on law and order. 60% of it, 2/3 of every taxpayer dollar. That's not good. We've long known that, and that we need to decrease that footprint in order to free up the general fund on homeless initiatives, education, summer youth employment programs, all the things that are very pro-reform, anti-recidivism, making sure people simply don't have contact with the criminal justice system due to the crises of poverty and illness and COVID. So we need a leader that's ever present on that, and knowing that reform, when we choose treatment over incarceration, that is how we get those tremendous savings. And I would love to talk to you about reframing this $40 million budget. Contact me at any time. I want to talk about my new fraud unit that Jack Chin's going to come out and help me create. So it's all about making sure we're healthier going forward, and certainly keeping that population down. Keeping people in homes and out of the system is the overarching goal for everything. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Laura. We'll now move to closing statements. You each have 2 minutes, and we will start with Jonathan.
Thank you. So imagine how exciting it will be when on day one of my time in office, we would announce that we are no longer prosecuting personal possession of marijuana, period, even if there hasn't been a legislative change in Arizona. I was the first candidate to commit to that. We won't prosecute adults, even as a misdemeanor, period. Imagine how exciting it'll be at the same announcement that we're announcing that we will no longer seek the death penalty in Pima County, that we will no longer allow prison to be a remedy for addiction with somebody who poses no threat to community safety, only a threat to themselves. Treatment will always be the approach that we take. Imagine if we stand up and say, we're ending criminalization of poverty. We will not seek money bond for somebody who is non-dangerous. Imagine if on that same day, we're announcing that we'll be first in the country with a rehabilitation reentry specialist working in the county attorney's office, because I'm tired of waiting, frankly, for our public defender to spend the money he's obtained to have a peer navigator to help people getting out of prison or getting out of custody. We will do it ourselves. Imagine if we increase treatment alternatives and we reform law enforcement, all while we're also protecting community safety and protecting victim rights. It can be done. When the next Derek Chauvin murder occurs, and you need a tested prosecutor to get that police officer held accountable, some of the most difficult types of cases there are, you need somebody who is not only a committed reformer, but a tested prosecutor to lead other prosecutors. Protecting the community is not the easy part. It's the hard part. We will do these reforms and we will protect the community. It's a very exciting time, and I really appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Laura?
Thank you. Criminal justice reform has been my lifetime study. It drove me into political science in undergrad. It drove me into law school, wanting to work on wrongful conviction type of work. It drove me first into the county public defender's office for 4 years, and then because I'm bilingual, it drove me into the federal defender's office for 8 years, from 2008 to 2016. And I'm such a policy geek that I watched the Obama administration transform the Department of Justice, and I watched the transformation of a prosecutor's office, a federal prosecutor's office, with reform measures coming in. I watched them hire 25, we're high volume in Tucson. I watched them hire 25 prosecutors and create a new rule where they hired them right out of law school, and they created a training program right there to inspire them and to usher in criminal justice reform. I want to end where I started. I thank you for your life's work. I have learned so much from the Justice Collaborative, from the appeal, from all of our partners across the nation on what you've been doing for years. I continue to benefit from your life's work. And I ask you to go to lauraconover.com. I'm on Twitter at Conover17L, I think it is, proving I never intended to be a candidate for office, right? Join me at lauraconover.com, and let's keep making history together. Thank you so much. Thank you to the appeal. Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. This concludes our Pima County Attorney Candidate Forum. As a reminder, primary election day is on Tuesday, August 4th. And if you are voting by mail, your ballot must be received, not postmarked, by 7 p.m. on election day. Thank you so much to the candidates and to everyone who joined us today.